Good afternoon to you. It's 3:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today, 3:30, we'll talk to Joe Concha from Fox News. He's a contributor there, and we'll get his perspective on what America deserves to hear from Kamala Harris tonight and what we will hear by all likeliness. You know, that interview was apparently already conducted, at least as of this morning. It was scheduled to take place at 1:45 this afternoon. So one can assume it's probably already done and now being edited by CNN staff ahead of its broadcast tonight at 9. We'll see what comes of it. We'll talk to Joe about what to expect. Mike Van Meter is here at 4 o'clock, a veteran, a man who's served his country his whole life, now running against Jerry Connolly in Virginia. May he win. We'll talk to him about his candidacy and what Jerry Connolly is up to this week. It involves Arlington National Cemetery. More on that in a moment. And from the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts is here at 5:30. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. But just when you think the Biden administration can't become more disgusting, they do it yet again. We keep finding out new information about the events that transpired on Monday at Arlington National Cemetery when President Trump went there at the invitation of the Gold Star families to pay his respects to the fallen 13 who were killed at the terrorist attack at Abbey Gate in Afghanistan now 3 years ago this week. Most of those killed were Marines. 11 of them were. One was a sailor, and one was an Army soldier. And they all perished there in Afghanistan, as you well know. And it was because of the decision-making of the Biden administration that those events occurred. It didn't have to happen that way. They could have kept Bagram. There was all sorts of ways to actually conduct a much safer withdrawal from Afghanistan than what we were served, what those men and women were served. And ever since that event, the Biden-Harris strategy has been either to distract you, to downplay it, to forget it, or to just straight up ignore the families of those who were affected in the attack. The only way they measure this is, does this hurt us? Is this going to help us or hurt us politically? And if it's going to hurt us, let's just pretend it never happened. Remember, in the days following the terrorist attack at Abbey Gate, how did the Biden administration seek to resolve the fact that these images were crossing all of our screens? We lost all of these American service members. We had many American service members who were maimed in the attack. You had many other human beings who were killed in the attack right there in Afghanistan. You had people falling from airplanes as those last American military planes were trying to get out of the country. The images and the exit was so disastrous that the Biden administration, they hatched a plan to make it seem like they fixed everything. Remember? And they said, oh, we caught the terrorists. The people who were responsible for the bombing of Abbey Gate, we got them. And actually, they didn't get them. Instead, what they had done was they bombed a bunch of civilians. And they later had to come back with their tail tucked between their legs and say, oh, oops, we bombed civilians. We killed innocent people. And the goal of that was, at the time, was to make it seem like, oh, they were people of action. They were taking care of this. They were doing everything they could to avenge the deaths of these service members. It was one catastrophe on top of another. And then during the dignified transfer of remains 3 years ago, Joe Biden very notoriously gave those bodies and those families just an awful, awful reception. And it left the families so disheartened by what they had to experience, as the president was disinterested during that dignified transfer of remains. Kept staring at his watch. He had other places to be, trying to check what time it was. The White House would go on to lie about that. Even recently, various people, was it Jen Psaki, right, would lie about that. She's since come out and apologized. Sorry about that. But the lies just continued. Lie after lie after lie after lie. And that brings us to this week. This week, as the families do every year since then, for these last 3 years, they gathered together to honor the fallen at Arlington National Cemetery. Each year they do this. Each year they go and they lay wreaths at the Tomb of the Unknown. And then they visit the grave sites of those veterans, of those fallen heroes who are buried at Arlington. That's what they do. And for this year's event, again, the one they do every year, they decided we want President Trump to stand with us because he has been standing with us. While President Biden doesn't say the names of the fallen, he doesn't speak to the families of the fallen, he doesn't acknowledge their existence, and in the brief window of time that he was with them, he treated them very poorly. It's been President Trump, the families say, who's constantly been there for them, who has been that shoulder to cry on, who has been that open ear, who has been the president who is talking to them about their grief and working through it with them. It's been President Trump. That story has been consistent since day one, that the Gold Star families feel heard by him and respected by him. And so they extend this invitation to him to join them at Arlington on Monday. He does. Every aspect of that visit was solemn. Every aspect. You saw the images. The media, by and large, didn't want to cover it Monday. They barely gave it attention Monday because they were concerned about the political implications. They were upset that these families appreciated Trump. They were upset that Trump looked more decent than Biden. They were upset that this event would remind people of Biden and Harris's failures in the withdrawal from Afghanistan that left all of these young men and women dead. So they didn't cover it Monday. They didn't. They mostly ignored it. And yet Trump was there. Respectful, decent. And it wasn't just a spur of the moment thing that had occurred, and it wasn't easy to get Trump there. It wasn't easy. It turns out the Biden administration, by way of the people who control access to Arlington National Cemetery, tried to stop Trump and the Gold Star families from having this event at all. They threw barrier after barrier in their way. I've been kind of giving you some of the contours of this as it's developed throughout the week, what we've been learning. But we have some new additions for you today, and I promised them yesterday as this was all coming to pass. My colleague at the Daily Caller, Henry Rogers, has an excellent piece up today that says it's headlined, Gold Star families had trouble getting Trump into Arlington until House Speaker intervened. Now, yesterday we talked to some of the Gold Star family members who said that very thing on our air, who relayed that to us. Darren Hoover, in particular, was telling us the trouble that they had just getting into Arlington National Cemetery, now for the third year, to and to have President Trump with them. The Biden administration was throwing barriers in front of them. And here's what Henry reported overnight. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson had to intervene to get former President Trump into Arlington National Cemetery. The Gold Star families invited Trump to Arlington. He laid a wreath there for the 13 service members. However, a Gold Star family told the caller that Arlington National Cemetery was trying to make it very difficult for the former president to even appear for the ceremony, something that the families had requested. Arlington National Cemetery told the Gold Star families they could only be there for a specific time that wouldn't work for everybody's schedule, and were also told that the president couldn't join them at their children's grave sites, the family told the caller. The chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCaul, congressman, explained to the Daily Caller that he was contacted by Gold Star parents Darren Hoover and Kelly Barnett. They're the parents of Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover. Hoover and Barnett told him that Arlington, pardon me here as I lose track of the text. Hoover and Barnett told him that Arlington Cemetery was giving the Gold Star parents of the service members a hard time about coordinating the ceremony with Trump. McCaul immediately reached out to Speaker Johnson to ask him for his assistance. And here's McCall's quote to the Daily Caller, to Henry. When Darren and Kelly contacted me, I was furious to hear the report that their request to have President Trump join them to commemorate the anniversary of Taylor's death was being stymied, along with several of the other family members of U.S. service members killed at Abbey Gate. I immediately asked what I could do to help, and I reached out to Speaker Johnson to see what he could do. Thankfully, Speaker Johnson and his team acted quickly and were able to get the situation resolved. But something like this should never have happened. Gold Star families have already suffered enough, have already suffered enough. My understanding is that the speaker, I believe, reached out to the Secretary of the Army to make this happen. That they had to reach the highest levels to try and get this on, to make this go. And if that's the case, I mean, think about what we're saying. Gold Star family members who have every right to visit the gravesites of their fallen loved ones, and a former and perhaps the next president of the United States are having difficulty visiting Arlington National Cemetery because the Biden administration is throwing blocks up in front of them. Let me add something to this today, something that I've learned. One of the ways that Arlington was telling the Gold Star families that they may not be allowed to go there is they began saying, well, we have this children's school group that we're thinking about putting at that time. A children's school group? What? So the plan was to use kids as human shields to prevent the Gold Star families and Trump from appearing there out of clearly concern that this would be an embarrassment to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So now school children were being used as weapons in all of this. And it took the Speaker of the House to clear the runway to make what is an obvious event happen. A number of congressmen got involved. Congressman Darrell Issa called on Biden himself to meet with the Gold Star families on multiple occasions. Darrell Issa was present on Monday for the ceremonies, and he had been in contact with Arlington in the lead up. Quote, this administration absolutely interfered with the tributes to the 13 fallen. In its war on Trump, it made the Gold Star families collateral damage, said Darrell Issa, and that's true. Two sources close to all of the discussions telling the Daily Caller that they worked with Arlington National Cemetery to move the time of the event to a time that would accommodate the attendance of President Trump. That was done as a request by the families as they were not receiving that assistance from Arlington National Cemetery. Another source familiar with all these conversations between the Gold Star families and Arlington said that after Johnson's phone call, the entire situation changed. The Speaker of the House had to get involved. Representatives Issa, Mast, Chairman Mike McCall, all instrumental in assisting the Gold Star families. After the Speaker's call, the situation shifted significantly. It was only 3 days before the ceremonies, and Arlington National Cemetery waited until the last minute to even confirm the key components of the events with the families. Okay, so I think I've well established here, they were trying to stop this from occurring. But they failed, and luckily, Speaker Johnson, to his great credit, got involved. That's the level of government we had to reach. The House Speaker, who's in the presidential line of succession, had to get involved in order to make this event possible. Now, what happens on Monday? On Monday, they arrive for the wreath laying. The wreath laying goes off, as far as we can tell, without a hitch. The events of the wreath laying, and you've probably by now seen the images of it. Very respectful event. The kind of event you'd expect at the Tomb of the Unknown, where you have the president laying the wreaths alongside the families. And then they exit from there and they head to Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery. Section 60, by now you likely know, is home to the fallen of Afghanistan and Iraq, of the recent wars. Section 60. This is where these families are going to visit their own children, to see their gravesites. And it's there, en route to Section 60, where the drama we've become aware of occurs. Now, the framing that NPR, which is a government-funded news outlet, who was served this story on a platter this week by the Biden administration, the framing they went with is that Trump people were being lunatics, that Trump people were being entitled, and they were physically fighting with Arlington National staff. This is what they served everybody with. And so all of a sudden, a story that received almost no media attention, Trump's visit to Arlington, became a story that was receiving a lot of media attention because it was used as a weapon to attack him. And so what was occurring at Arlington as they went to Section 60 was that you had a Trump photographer who was there at the request of the families. And let me share a detail with you that you may or may not know. And I think the families, they actually addressed this in their statement. Arlington had asked the families, Arlington National Cemetery, they reached out to the Gold Star families and they said, would you be okay if there are cameras there? And the families adamantly said on multiple occasions, yes, We want the cameras there. We want President Trump there. We want his camera there. We want this event commemorated. They wanted to have these memories, and they wanted these photographers. And so Arlington was clear on this. So when a photographer gets out, heading towards the grave sites, two Arlington staffers lunge in the way of the photographer to stop him from going. This is being said, Trump's people were being physical. It wasn't Trump's people who lunged out to block other human beings from moving. It was Biden administration officials who jumped in front of the photographer to stop him from going. Now, this is a ridiculous mission anyway, because everyone who was there had cameras. Everyone had camera phones, iPhones. There were going to be images of this no matter what these guys at Arlington were attempting to do. But what you're hearing today is that, it was just a woman. There was a woman, this is what the media is telling us today, who was being manhandled by Trump people. Well, I'm here to tell you, it wasn't just a woman who was there. There was also a man about twice her size, and both of them were getting in the way of this photographer making his way to the gravesite to take the photos that the families expected. That's what happened at Arlington. And so drama that was created by Biden people is now being turned into drama that was created by Trump people. You see what's happening. This is the same garbage that we're served on a constant basis. And add today the latest addition to this miserable saga. The Biden administration has released a statement today, unsigned, just from the United States Army, attacking Donald Trump, attacking his campaign, saying that they assaulted a woman and that she doesn't want to press charges, and now the Army considers the matter to be settled. This is the statement they released today. A total scandal. So, of course, by now you know they have politicized the entire military. Now they're releasing statements in the name of the United States Army to attack their political opponent. And it's all in service of trying to bury their own culpability in Afghanistan. That's what we're watching this week. One disgraceful act after another designed to impugn Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's political opponent, and in the process, diminish the grief and the suffering of the Gold Star families who sought to commemorate their children this week. All right. Okay, we as we get more information on all of this, and trust me, this is not over. I know the Army statement the Biden administration put out today, so this is a settled matter. This is in no way a settled matter. It's a very open matter. We have to get to the bottom of every way that the Biden administration has interfered with Gold Star families merely commemorating the lives of their children. It's outrageous. Joe Concha is going to join us just moments away. We'll talk to him about this big CNN interview. Kamala Harris is now pretending to be Donald Trump so much, she brought Walz with her. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 3:35 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up 4 o'clock, Mike Van Meter joins us, running in Virginia against Jerry Connolly. Thank goodness. Someone has to. Hopefully can unseat that guy. And then Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Foundation will be with us at 5:30. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Kamala Harris set for, well, she just apparently did, I think. It was started at 1:45. That's what they were all telling us. A pre-taped CNN interview alongside Tim Walz. At least someone on CNN was honest about how weird this all looks. Scott Jennings had this to say this week.
I think it's incredibly weak. Weak sauce to show up with your running mate. The fact that they don't have enough confidence in her to let her sit herself, the actual top of the ticket, and do a single interview. In fact, I think the hand-wringing and the gyrations over this over the last month show a troubling lack of confidence in her political ability, which also makes you wonder as a voter, well, what kind of president would you be if this kind of a small-time decision, can we do an interview or not, what does that look like for your decision-making process, so on? So, yes, I think Republicans are going to think it's pretty weak to show up with effectively someone to take up half the time.
Well, that's for sure. And Scott Jennings, once again, saying the correct thing on a network that doesn't usually do that. Joe Concha joins us now. He's a Fox News contributor and the author of Progressively Worse, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys. Hello, Joe.
Can we give Scott Jennings and Van Jones a show and make it like, pardon the interruption already? Because I'm a Fox guy. I get this, but he's the lone voice of reason there, and he makes every segment that much more interesting. I can't say enough good things about Scott Jennings making an argument based on facts without the snark, without the emotion. And thank God that he's on there. Otherwise, it would be an MSNBC echo chamber.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I invariably find myself cheering whatever he's saying on that network because he seems to stand alone. But he's right on all these things. Let me ask you, Joe, about this core point, though. This idea that Kamala does this interview with Tim Walz today, has Walz sit alongside her. I've seen a lot of lefty types saying, oh, well, this is normal. Lots of presidential candidates have their running mate sit next to them. Do you buy that?
No, not remotely. She needs her goofy chaperone and Tim Walz, the guy who wants to put tampons in my son's elementary school. Mm-hmm. My son's going into third grade this year. I'm pretty sure that he can't menstruate in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, put that guy on there.
Well, he's only in third grade.
Why he's there. Yeah, third, exactly. Look, dude, here's the thing. The fact that Tim Walz is there only is so she only has to speak 50% of the time. I think that's the way it goes, that he'll answer a question, she'll answer a question, they'll play off each other, they'll try to have this fake chemistry that they have, and that's that. But CNN, it is shameful that they agreed to a pre-tape here. And I get that Trump does some pre-tape sometimes, but now he does a lot of live interviews too, and he does press conferences, which are also live. And the fact that this is going to be packaged, homogenized, I call on CNN. I know they listen to this show. It's a number one show. That's certainly for sure. CNN needs to absolutely release the entire transcript, A, and B, put the entire interview unedited on CNN.com on their social media pages. Otherwise, I'm going to be left wondering, what word salads did I miss? What questions didn't Dana ask during this situation? Because there are so many questions, Vince, for this candidate at this point. And I just hope that we get the Dana bash we got during the debate, June 27th, where I think she and Tapper did a decent job as far as asking good questions, germane questions, and not making themselves the story, not fact-checking like Candy Crowley did infamously back in 2012 with Mitt Romney, where the fact-check was actually wrong. I hope that all she does is do the Tim Russert.
Yes.
Play Kamala Harris's words as a candidate, as a vice president, and say what has changed since then. And I want to hear the answer, because without a teleprompter and without prescriptive remarks, she is a human Chernobyl, Vince.
That's for sure. So yeah. Let me quote from CNN's website today. This is what we call their curtain raiser on the interview tonight. And I want to point out, because this matters, that the people who write for a website, for a cable news network, they're not involved in actually planning the interview. So this may not tell us everything about how this interview goes today. But here's what they wrote in their own article. They said, the interview will present Harris with the first chance to elucidate her position on various domestic and foreign issues during a campaign that has so far been heavy on vibes but light on concrete policy. She will also have a chance, if she chooses, to explain how her positions might differ from Biden. So here, this is the CNN offering this morning, Joe Concha, is, well, this is her chance to finally get into concrete policy and not just all the vibes of the campaign. Should we be encouraged by CNN's self-awareness here?
I hope so, because it's been all icing and no cake to this point, right? All foam, no beer, all sizzle, no steak, and pick your analogy. But yeah, it's completely and totally the most ludicrous, absurd campaign that I have ever seen.
Yeah. And
yet I got to see that basically this thing is neck and neck at this point. I think in the end, Vince, I don't know if this interview moves the needle all that much, because we're going into a holiday weekend and it's going to be packaged and edited, and maybe there'll be some answers where you're shaking your head a little bit and the bar is set so low anyway. But I think that debate on September 10th, ABC, I think that's the whole ballgame. I really do. Just like it was on June 27th for Joe Biden. And if Donald Trump preps and he is disciplined and he simply calls her out on all of her positions, where she was and where she's going now, and calls her out on the fact that she's never held a job in the business community, for example, so how could she possibly be an expert on the economy, a number one issue, asks her how price fixing actually works and the history of it as far as Venezuela, the Soviet Union, and even here in the U.S., and everything in terms of the border, and everything in terms of, well, everything. If Donald Trump is disciplined, doesn't speak too much, and allows her to be the focus, I think he's your 47th president. I
want to get more into the debate news today, but I just want to point out on this idea that she may or may not have business experience. I love the Washington Free Beacon today is looking for evidence that she ever actually worked at McDonald's, which is one of my favorite stories of the day. The left is very angry that the Free Beacon's even asking the question, but the Beacon just keeps approaching the campaign and saying, hey, if you have any evidence that she actually worked at McDonald's, we'd love to hear it. And the campaign's these crickets. They're not giving them anything, which suggests there's a chance she was not making soft serve or doling out fries at McDonald's, Joe Concha.
Can you picture Kamala Harris working at McDonald's in 1,000 years? I don't think this happened. There'd be some picture somewhere, some coworker that comes forward and says, "Yeah, no, I work with her. It's true." That's not happening.
No, she'd actually have better interpersonal skills if she had worked at McDonald's. Like there's something missing from her. Okay, let me ask about this debate. You raised this on September 10th. It's set. ABC is going to be conducting it. This is the same debate that President Trump and President Biden had agreed to. Kamala's campaign insists that, that's the schedule, that we're just doing the schedule you already agreed to. We're not adding any Fox News debates or anything like that. And so by extension, President Trump's campaign has operated under the assumption up until recently that all of the same rules would be in place. And today we get an update on that. ABC News has notified both campaigns, according to the New York Post, that it will be sticking with the same rules from the June 27th CNN debate. They're standing on stage. They're only allowed to have a pen and a pad of paper, no pre-written notes. They can have a bottle of water, and there's to be no audience, and the mics will be muted when they're not speaking. That's the latest today. How do you think this plays?
I don't get it, Vince. Why would Kamala Harris ever need a cheat sheet? Why would she need notes when she is an expert on all of her policy positions? It's Sarcastic Thursday, apparently. Look, I think that obviously this all favors Trump. I think the Biden campaign, ironically, gave Trump quite the gift when they did the whole muted mics thing, because that takes away Kamala Harris's, you remember 2020 when she debated Mike Pence, and her whole big line that the left kept cheering was, excuse me, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. I'm speaking. Even when like Mike Pence wasn't interrupting her, she would say that. So Trump can't interrupt her if his mic is off, so therefore she doesn't have that excuse. And again, I just want to hear, are you 100% for fracking, or are you now against fracking? No, I'm sorry, you were against fracking. Now you're for it. How does that work? Do you want an electric vehicle mandate or not? Do you want to abolish ICE or not? Why are you suddenly for border wall construction like your campaign surrogates have been saying at this point? And, can men get pregnant? I want to know all the answers to this, Vince, and I hope I get it that night. But then again, it's ABC.
Yes.
But then again, it's David Muir, who he's not George Stephanopoulos. I think he'll do a decent job. I do.
You do. You have at least some moderate level of hope for David Muir in that role.
It's not Brett Baer and Martha McCallum type of caliber, and that's why she will not go anywhere near Fox News. But I was surprised by CNN and Tapper and Bash the way they conducted themselves. I think Muir is kind of like the Gavin Newsom of network anchors, great hair, good-looking guy. But I think that he's vanilla enough where he's just going to ask.
He's kind of a mannequin. I don't even really know I guess I don't know his opinions. Not that I watch his show or anything, right? but he is just kind of a mannequin. It's like, I don't, maybe he'll be good. Maybe, who knows at this point? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But let me just say that something that worked in the lead up to the CNN debate that I think is worth duplicating for the right as a strategy is beating them over the head with their own biases. Because leading up to that CNN debate, the Trump campaign, everybody I know on the right, everybody was bashing CNN over the head with every left-wing nonsense talking point that they've advanced through the years and saying, you're going to do this? Is that what the debate's going to be? Is it going to be 3-on-1? You're all going to tag team against Trump? Is that what's going to happen? And I think when Jake Tapper and Dana Bash went into that debate, they went in cowed. They went in like, oh, crap, we do not want to be caught in this thing that the right has been saying about us all week. And they just asked basic questions, and they sat back and got out of the way. I think that strategy worked perfectly, Joe.
They worked the refs completely, yeah. And then Tapper and Bash like, oh, yeah? You think we're going to be biased? Well, watch this when we do our jobs the way we should, right, in a normal fashion. So, yeah, I think they got cowed. I think ABC could get cowed as well here because, again, you could play back all the clips of Stephanopoulos or Jonathan Karl, who's the biggest phony out there. I hope you're listening, Jonathan, because it's true. This guy has written not one, not two, 3 anti-Trump books in 4 years. I had no time to write one on Biden for some reason. Go figure for a guy who covers the White House. So, yeah, thank God those guys aren't doing it, and we're going to see the folks that we mentioned. And, again, I think 80 million people tune in there, and Kamala Harris, even though the bar will be set low, I don't see how she defends these positions that are all over the place. I don't think she knows what she believes, Vince, at this point.
No, she doesn't. And this is also one of the reasons why Tim Walz is sitting alongside her today, because if either of them tried to do interviews independently, they wouldn't know what the other's positions were. They have to. This is like they'll be working this out in real time. We saw some reporting earlier this week that Tim Walz would like to do interviews, but they're not putting him out there because he doesn't actually know the campaign's positions.
No one knows the campaign positions. You go to the website, the policy positions still aren't on there. And I got to watch some idiot on CNN before who is an advocate for the Kamala Harris campaign. And he said, yeah, but who? No, I'm sorry. This was on Fox before, and it was a funny line from John Roberts. He said, oh, like anybody really cares about policy positions on a website. Since when has anybody ever cared about that? And John Roberts just deadpan back, forever. Because it's true.
Yeah.
Right? We want to know where you stand on certain things. I don't think they could sketch their way through the next 70 days. I just don't. I know I sound like a cockeyed optimist, but all I know is that she had the perfect 4 weeks of media coverage, and I still look at Nate Silver's forecast today, and he still has Trump having a better chance of winning. What does that tell you?
Yeah, and he's pointing out that this is not how it's supposed to go. There's supposed to be a more meaningful bump after the convention, and it's not happening for her. Real quick, before I let you go, I want to play that audio you just cited. Here's John Roberts and that Democrat strategist today on Fox.
$540 million raised, $82 million in 1 week.
But will you acknowledge that there's no policy page on her website? And so how do people
when
know
did we
what she
start
really
caring
stands
about
for?
policy pages on websites when every single time every time she steps to the podium, she talks about her policy in such a direct way that voters are responding. Those are the people
what her border policy is?
Say it one more time.
Can you tell me what her border policy is?
Oh, she said on day one she would sign the bipartisan border legislation that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump has taken credit for killing or not getting across the...
What's her policy on fracking?
She's going to introduce that.
Her anonymous...
She's going to introduce it. What does that mean, introduce? This guy's spitting like a top. But that's pretty funny. Yeah, he's like, why do we care about policy pages?
I misquoted John. It was since forever, so that's better. Yes. Yeah. What's her policy? In fact, she's going to introduce that. No, she already did. She did during the climate crisis town hall on CNN in 2019 when she says she's 100% against fracking, period, Vince.
Yeah. And by the way, how can you introduce fracking? It exists. The problem is you're trying to get rid of it. That's the problem.
Vince, they ended it on day one, remember, on public lands.
I know.
They did eliminate that, so it's a policy, apparently. But anyway.
Not good for American workers. Hey, Joe Concha, as always, thank you, sir. Good to talk to you.
BC, thank you.
All right, be well. All right, let's go to the phones. I've got Ann calling in from Alexandria now, line 3. Ann, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
So glad to be with you. Wanted to go back to your conversation about the Gold Star families at Arlington.
Yes.
And I post on Twitter. I don't do a lot of posting on Twitter, but I'll tell you, I've never, in the 10 years I've been on Twitter, had an article, the Rogers article on Johnson stepping in, blow up. Oh, my God. I think I've had to block 100 liberal trolls just in the past few hours.
What you're referring to is Henry Rogers' article for the Daily Caller published last night that indicated that it was House Speaker Mike Johnson who needed to intervene to get rid of all the blockades the Biden administration was throwing up to stop Donald Trump and the Gold Star families from being together on Monday.
I mean, they're just going to, the families didn't invite him. That's a lie. This was a publicity stunt. He just did it for a photo op. Why didn't he go the other 2 years? I said, because they invited him this year. And, unbelievable, and he broke the law. He needs to be prosecuted. They need to ban him from Arlington Cemetery forever. I mean, they have just lost their friggin' minds. I mean, it's unbelievable. Hundreds and hundreds of trolls. Unbelievable.
And it's a perfect inversion of the truth, isn't it, Ann? So who was abusing their power here? Who was trying to use the Gold Star families for political purposes? Who was trying to diminish them? Who's been all week long trying to turn a solemn event into a political spectacle? That has been Biden all the way through.
Yes, and I also made that point. I said, you're just jealous that he wasn't invited. They didn't want him there because he was responsible for their death. Oh, no, it's Trump that was responsible, blah, blah. I mean, just have lost their ever-loving mind.
Yeah, and unfortunately...
It means it's effective.
Unfortunately, it's even sadder than that. It's even sadder than not receiving an invitation. There have been all sorts of people who keep asking Biden to meet with them, and they just ignore the requests. Daryl Issa said that he's been sending all sorts of requests, and they've just been ignored. They don't want to do it. That's just awful, Ann.
But clearly, again, I post tons of stories every day. Clearly, this one really strikes a nerve. So it's good.
Yeah, because it's true, and that's why they're so angry about it. Thank you, Ann. I appreciate your call. Bye-bye. Let me take Jim calling in from Louisa, Virginia. Jim, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show, line 1. Jim.
Hey, Vince. Great show.
I cannot speak to what happened in Section 60 at Arlington regarding the photography, but I can speak to Arlington operations. I'm a retired Army judge advocate. I worked in the General Counsel's office at the Pentagon 15 years ago. But the Army is the executive agent for Arlington Cemetery operations. Sure. And all those roadblocks that hit Trump, that had to be done, with the Secretary of the Army's knowledge, possibly with her, possibly her orchestrating it. Christine Wormuth is the Secretary of the Army, but, or otherwise, if she approved, because Trump said they had approval, so perhaps Army approved it, but then the Secretary of Defense or some, higher authority, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, maybe they dictated down to try and prevent this from happening. But there's just no way the Secretary of the Army didn't know that Trump had been invited, et cetera.
This makes a lot of sense to me, but I want to make sure I understand it. So this is not a situation where a couple of middle managers just were like, oh, I don't know if we can accommodate this. If you get the former president of the United States on and a bunch of Gold Star families together, and the plan is for them to arrive at Arlington, this would go to the highest levels of decision makers, correct?
Definitely. And in Army General Counsel, we had a senior attorney who, among other things, worked all things Arlington. And we were working issues with Arlington Cemetery on a weekly basis, so there's no way that didn't come across the Secretary of the Army's plate. And, so I just wonder, did she throw up the roadblocks because her client, the Secretary of the Army, he's the, she is the executive agent for Arlington, or did, Secretary Austin, Secretary of Defense Austin, and his staff, did they push down that, try and prevent this from happening? But you're right, it would have gone to the highest levels, and there's just no way some low-level manager could have done this. Now, it sounds like what happened there at Section 60, who knows where those folks came from and whose authority they were acting under, but in terms of the permission and the roadblocks for Trump's party to even be there, that had to be with the knowledge of the Secretary of the Army.
Smart point. Thank you for your experience helping to illuminate that too. Yeah, we will keep digging to get some more answers on this, because I think they're worthwhile. There are people who are meddling in the commemoration of the fallen, and this deserves to be exposed. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that call. Coming up, we've got Mike Van Meter joining us. He's running in Virginia's 11th congressional district. That's against Jerry Connolly. Earlier this week, Jerry Connolly made a demand. I want some documents from the Arlington incident to be released. Well, so do we. We'll talk about that coming up with Mike.